Good morning. Happy Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. Thank you for joining me. It's a beautiful day outside, 54 degrees and nice sunny weather. We've been having some great weather outside. I don't know if you've been outside, but it is absolutely stunningly beautiful this time of year. And for some reason, it seems to be cooler than what I would expect this time of year. But I'll take it because every day that we push off summer is a better day, right? And the birds are singing and the animals are hopping around, and it's just absolutely beautiful outside. This is just gorgeous time. And I pray God's blessings in your life today. Thank you for joining me. We have two birthdays today, and the birthdays are Cassidy Arona and Alyssa Curlin. So happy birthday to both of you. May you have a blessed day. Wow. And then we have a birthday tomorrow. Interesting. We have two birthdays tomorrow. All right. Tomorrow's Thursday. And let's see, what else can I say? That's about it. The greenness of everything is just incredible. If you drive around Vail and just look at some of the absolute green stuff, it's pretty incredible, pretty wonderful. All right. Just a little bit of a heads up. There is a summer camp in June. And let me pull up my calendar. Memorial Day is May 27th. And there's a summer camp that starts on May 26th on the Sunday, and it goes through that Friday, the 31st. So that week, in all likelihood, I will be up at summer camp, unless daughter number 1 gives birth to grandchild number 4, in which case I'm going to Chicago. And I've arranged it so that that I'm not critical to summer camp, because I want to be available to go see grandchild number 4 from daughter number 1. How's that? And then the following week, which is June 3rd, so this is the first week of June, I am scheduled to fly to Houston and move son number 1 and son's wife number 1 to Janesville, Minnesota, if you can believe that. Population 2,500 or something like that. It's on the east end. It's about 20 miles east of Mankato, Minnesota, and about an hour and a half south of the Twin Cities. So down in that area is a little tiny, I shouldn't say tiny, a powerful, wonderful, great little town called Janesville. Most people have heard of Janesville, Wisconsin. Apparently there's a Janesville, Minnesota, and this is where they're going to move for a job. And that's very exciting, extremely exciting. So I'm going to help son number 1 and daughter-in-law number 3. I don't know how that all works. No, daughter-in-law number 1, right? So move to Janesville. So basically, the last week of May and the first week of June, I'll be gone. So I have about 3 more weeks with you, 2.5, 3 more weeks with you, and then the summer festivities begin. I won't be on for those 2 weeks, but then I'll be back after that. Unless I do go to summer camp and I do move son number 1, and then there's a new grandchild number 4 from daughter number 1 in Chicago, in which case I will be gone for that. And all of this is subject to change because, we're still in the world, and the world can bite back at us and sometimes do things that we don't expect. Not on your bingo card. I have a nephew that was kind of getting some difficult signals. And so he went to the doctor and found out that one aorta had grown into the other aorta at birth. It was a birth defect and never caught because, that was 40 years ago. And so he'll be having open heart surgery Monday. And so I pray for him and his family. He's got two beautiful children, one in middle school, one in elementary school. And great, 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 fine young man. So we want to keep him in our prayers also. All right. Let's see. Let's go ahead and get into our study. This one is interesting. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 21. David's king. He's back in Jerusalem, and he's squelched the Absalom uprising. Maybe didn't do the best job of it, but the people have accepted him as king, and so he's king in Jerusalem. And now he's doing kingly things. And this is what a king is supposed to do. Now, whether or not David handles it well or not, we'll see. But when you're a king, some of the things that you deal with are obviously an invading army, right? You've got, here in the United States, one of the jobs of the president is national security. But the other one is kind of general welfare of the people. A king would want to give as much freedom as possible. I don't know about in David's time, but today in the United States, as much freedom as possible. As long as things are going well, you give as much freedom as possible until the freedom causes problems. And then the problem is that the freedoms are restricted for a period of time, but then those restrictions are never overturned. So over a period of 250 years, you get restriction after restriction after restriction after restriction to the point where you're no longer free. And this happens in every society. And the experiment called the United States is a good one, and one would assume that we are the freest nation on the earth, but that may not necessarily be the case. There are actually companies out there, organizations out there that rank freedom of countries. And the United States was always at the top, but it's no longer at the top. We just have a lot of restrictions, and that's kind of how it works, because the restrictions always come, but they never go. And so we're going to find out about some restrictions in Israel that David puts in that seem rather harsh. All right, so let's start reading of chapter 21. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, "It is on the account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death." So this is something that kings do. There's a famine in the land. Now, notice it's called a famine, but typically famines are called by lack of food, and lack of food is caused for several different reasons. One is probably the most obvious one is a lack of rain. And after the lack of rain, the famine might happen because of locusts. It might happen because of a disease. So those are typically 3 of the reasons why you would have a famine. And or maybe, disease, lack of nutrients, or animals coming and chomping on your food. I mean, those are probably the 3 ones. There could also be, I suppose, overgrazing. Although I doubt that, they would have learned that if the sheep are eating the food, the people can't eat the food. So there probably wouldn't be overgrazing. But it's interesting during the time of the Exodus and the time, or not the time of the Exodus, the time when the 12 sons of Israel, Jacob, there was a famine in the land. And so they go to Egypt. And they find out that Joseph is Pharaoh's number 1, and they plead for food from Pharaoh. But Pharaoh knew about the famine because God had revealed it to him in a dream, and Joseph interpreted the dream. So the 7 years of famine, which is a lot of famine. And Pharaoh prepared for it, and he created grain storehouses and all of those things. But it's called a famine, and it's not necessarily tied to rain. And yet, as we go further into the Old Testament, we'll find out that they do realize there's a link between lack of rain and famine. And it's just interesting. They just call it famine. I would say most likely it's lack of rain. And there's lack of rain for 3 years. So the people are now starving. I mean, they're really digging deep, trying to find things to eat. And of course, one of the things you could do is move your family to a different area that's not a lack of rain and live there for a while. But once you create a city and a town, you don't want to move because of commerce and relationships and just the whole structure of the town provides a lot of security unless there's famine. So there's famine in the land, and David does a great thing. This is what a king should do. First of all, he notices that there's a famine, but then the second thing that he does is he goes to God. He seeks the face of the Lord and asks God, why are we having a famine? And God says, it's because Saul slaughtered the Gibeonites. Now, one of the things about there is no recorded history in the Old Testament, in the Kings, or in 1st, 2nd Samuel. There's nothing in it that says that Saul slaughtered the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites were in the Promised Land, and they had Israel had sworn an oath to the Gibeonites that they wouldn't remove them, that they allowed them to stay in the land. So there is precedent for Israel treating the Gibeonites well, but apparently Saul, and it's not recorded, maybe it's recorded because it was a violation. Saul didn't want it recorded, who knows, but it wasn't recorded. But apparently Saul put the Gibeonites to death. And because of that sin, this sin that happened during the reign of Saul, God tells David, this is the reason why there's the famine. It's because of this event. And now David has to figure, and so once David learns this, he has to deal with it. This is what kings do, right? They learn of a problem and then they have to solve the problem. And here the problem is there's this bad blood. There's this, what would you call it? History of bad things happening to the Gibeonites hanging over the head of Israel. Now, what's interesting is that the Gibeonites, if it happened, it's not recorded, but in all likelihood it happened because there's going to be a punishment for it. The Gibeonites probably never forgot this. People have long histories. Countries have long histories. And when we talk about long histories, I mean long histories. Because what happens in sin, the impact of sin in the world means that we're going to struggle in this life, always. And as a nation is struggling, as the Gibeonites are struggling, they're always going to look for somebody to blame. And in this case, there's bad blood between the Gibeonites and the Israelites because of this thing that Saul did. And the Gibeonites have been carrying this grudge for a number of years, and they don't forget. And you might even say that the conflict in the Middle East is because of the Philistines and the Israelites from thousands of years ago, that just these people are very, very cautious against each other. So this stuff happens for generations and generations. And whether or not it's even true, if there is this bad blood between the Gibeonites and the Israelites, it's not helpful for neighborly relations. So David is right to do what he's about to do. In verse 2, the king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul in his zeal for Israel and Judah had tried to annihilate them. So this is where we see the story. And David asked the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance?" And of course, the Lord's inheritance is the Israelites. So he brings in the Israelites and says, listen, we apparently have wronged you and we want to make amends. And when we make amends with you, then we know that the Lord's going to bless us. So what is it that we can do for you so that we can make everything right in the world? What is the justice that we can do? Verse 4, the Gibeonites answered him, we have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death. So the Gibeonites are like, we don't really see a way that you can solve this problem. We appreciate the offer, but gold and silver, you can't buy us off, and we can't put anyone to death. So what do you want me to do for you? David asked. They answered the king, as for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one. The king said, I will give them to you. So, wow. Wow. So they can't demand that Israel put these people to death. The Gibeonites can't come into Israel and kill these people to death. But the one thing that they can do is to take descendants of Saul and hand them over to the Gibeonites to go in their land, and the Gibeonites will put them to death in their land. And then they'll expose them. They'll expose their bodies in the land of Gibeonites. Now, this is a harsh punishment. I mean, a really, really harsh punishment. This means that 7 descendants will go over to this land and be killed. And now the question is, this brings up just an interesting, it almost sounds like sacrificing the virgins in the volcano, that some of those cultures did. It seems a little bit harsh. But sometimes the atonement for sin is harsh. And in the case for Christianity, the atonement for sin is the death of God himself on a brutal death on the cross. And so this type of stuff is natural for mankind. And without Christianity, cultures have always looked for ways to atone and appease for the gods. And sometimes it is throwing people into the volcano, or the Druids doing Druid sacrifices in the caves, or you go to the Mayans or the Incans and they have sacrifices on the altars, human sacrifices. These are the types of things that cultures do to atone for God's wrath. And Israel, in some respects, is no different. They're just seeking Yahweh's guidance, and Yahweh is telling them what the atonement is for this. Actually, Yahweh isn't directing the atonement for this. Yahweh is saying this is the reason why the famine is. And then David has to make atonement with the Gibeonites and finds out through the Gibeonites, this is the thing. Now, this may seem like a harsh thing, but does David, obviously you could pick older people, older descendants of Saul who are close to their death anyway. So they're only losing a smaller fraction of their life. These people may be willing to go because David may tell them, listen, we have to sacrifice 7 so that the famine ends. And there may be 7 people who are willing to sacrifice their own life to end the famine. Would you be willing to sacrifice your life for the health of your community? I mean, obviously we go to war for that, right? But would you be willing to sacrifice your own self, a voluntary slaughtering of your body by a foreign enemy, knowing that if you do that, all the rest of the people in your community will have food and the famine will end? And my guess is there are people that would do that. And my guess is that Saul's descendants would willingly go to do this. I mean, they probably didn't have to go by soldiers or chariots or anything like that. I'm guessing David said, you are the 7 chosen, and they're proudly to go to do this, and walked boldly into the face of the enemy, knowing that they were going to die, but that it would be the end of the famine. So the king says, yeah, I'll do that. So now the king has to decide who's going to go. So verse 7, the king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan. You'll remember Jonathan was David's best friend, has a son, Mephibosheth, who's lame. When David wanted to bless the house of Saul, he found out that Mephibosheth, who was lame, needed a place to stay or wanted to be honored. Actually, David just decided to honor Mephibosheth, brought him into the palace and basically treats him like a son all the days of his life. When David was fleeing Absalom, Mephibosheth does not go with his butler, Ziba, because Ziba fooled him, but Mephibosheth has always stayed loyal to David. So Mephibosheth gets spared. But, verse 8, but the king took Armani and Mephibosheth, the two sons of Aiah's daughter, Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul. So this is a different Mephibosheth. These are part of two sons of Aiah, who had been born to Saul, together with 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed them and exposed their bodies on the hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. So they picked a time of the barley harvest, hands over these 7 people, all of them descendants of Saul. And when the time is right, the Gibeonites slay these people. And they put their bodies out for display. Now, verse 10, Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. And from the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies, she did not let the birds touch them by day or the wild animals by night. So she goes to the bodies to make sure that wild animals and birds don't start to decimate the bodies. She wants to make sure that the bodies are stayed whole. Whenever a body died in that time, if nobody took care of the body or covered it up or put it in a grave, the wild animals would come and take bits and pieces of the body to the point that all was left was the bones. But she stays to make sure that the bodies are remained whole. And verse 11, when David was told what Aiah's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. They had stolen their bodies from the public square at Beth Shan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck Saul down on Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed, and gathered them up. And they buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish at Zelah in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered the prayer on behalf of the land. So after all of this, the rain comes, or the famine stops. And what David does is he starts to gather together the bones of Saul, Jonathan, these 7 people. He buries them all together as a monument to say, this is, when you think about it, it's quite an honor for these 7 people to be buried with Saul and Jonathan and the clan of Saul. And if you know anything about Old Testament history, the bones are really, it's not the bodies, it's the bones that have emotional value with them. The valley of the dry bones, right? Or the bones of the people who had died before. They spare the bones. At the time of Jesus, they would take a body, they'd put it in a tomb, the tomb would decay the body, and then years later they would go back, open up the tomb, and all that's left is the bones. And they would gather up the bone and they'd put them in these ossuaries, which is just a small stone case, and then they would bury the ossuaries. So it's like almost like what we do today with cremation, right? We cremate a body, and then we have the bones left, but the bones are crushed up and they're put in one place in a vault. And it's the same thing. It's just a larger vault because the bones haven't been crushed yet. And we know that at the time of Israel and in the time of the early church, it was really this tribal, it wasn't individuality, it was the tribe. So now David is honoring the tribe of Saul by burying Saul and Jonathan, these other people, to say, this is the tribe of Saul, and they will exist forever in this place, and they will not be forgotten. And that truly is very, very meaningful for the descendants of Saul. Maybe this should have been done all along, but David for some whatever reason didn't do it. But now he does it, and he honors the tribe of Saul. And this is a good thing. And God is pleased by this, and so the rain happens. And this is not a bad thing. All right, so, we'll end it there. We'll end it there. Let's close in prayer. Dear God, thanks for this day, and until we meet again, keep us in your grace. Amen. Let me look over here. I didn't have Facebook open. Oh my goodness, thank you all for joining me this morning. Minnesota, don't you know? Yes, a very exciting time for the family. Nephew is Billy. Thank you for that, Billy. And he's a good kid. I mean, a really good kid. You'd be very proud to know him. All right. Thank you for joining me this morning. And I pray God's blessings on your day. And we'll see y'all later. Take care. Bye.